It's winter, 1943, and you're a German sniper on the Eastern Front, and you've just been sent out on a special military operation to deal with the Soviet sniper problem. Now, you've been in the vicinity doing reconnaissance for a while now, and your target is a young Soviet sniper who's been heavily featured as a Soviet hero in their propaganda. While you can return to German lines at any time, you have been spending weeks in the field at a time, deep behind Russian lines sometimes, to target and eliminate this enemy sniper problem. And depending on conditions, it may take you up to 12 to 24 hours of travel to safely return to the German lines. So this week, you carefully set up a trap in the department store just to destroy him and his observer. And finally, from your hide, you see a pair of snipers inbound, and you slowly target them. You were able to eliminate one of them while they were displacing, and observe that the other sniper had withdrawn. So as hours passed, you finally broke cover and went to assess your kill. Right there, right next to the deceased Soviet sniper, you found a rifle that you've only heard of. You went in and grabbed it. Yes, it's a Mosin Nagant PEM Sniper, which this is a PU sniper. But the interesting thing is, there's a Bramit device on the muzzle. Now this is a device that decreases the noise signature of the rifle, and it's something that you've only heard of. But it makes sense, because this matches with what intelligence reports have been suggesting, that Soviet snipers have been exceedingly difficult to locate, and presumably they were using some NKVD's field manufactured decreased velocity loads for their Mosin Nagant snipers and suppressors equipped. So you decide, I'm going to take this rifle as a trophy, or perhaps as a useful tool as you begin to exfiltrate, and you sling it over your shoulder with a bandolier of ammunition that the Soviet sniper did not need anymore. But at that moment you freeze. The rumble of a Soviet armored column echoes through the streets. As you look over, a shot rings out. It barely misses you, but you drop to the ground. Enemy sniper in the area. Now you're forced to slow crawl out of the vicinity and only carry one rifle with its associated ammunition back to safety. Option number 1. Kar98k with a Zf39 optic and 68 rounds of sniper ammunition and 20 rounds of incendiary observation ammunition. Option number 2. That Mosin Nagant sniper with a suppressor, the Bramit device, with a mix of 150 rounds of decreased velocity ammunition and 150 rounds of standard ammunition. Now both of these rifles appear serviceable, especially with the intelligence reports on Soviet snipers eliminating German troops with such deadly accuracy, and that your rifle, your service rifle, was specifically spared from the damage. Which of these two options would you choose to survive and fight another day? But hurry though, snipers in the area.
Право. Есть загорание двух крайних диодов центральных смены. Нейтраль погасли. Рут влево. Есть загорание двух крайних диодов. В центре не горят. Нейтраль погасла.
Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we are live. So, welcome to Pick One. It's been 2 months since we ran our last one, Josh, and Josh rushed back for this one. I mean, this was not on a nice timeline for Josh, and Ian, you are on a distinctly different timeline than we are. In fact, you are almost in the future.
A little bit. I'm on the road right now, so I'm doing this live from Europe.
Yeah. So huge thanks for Ian for dialing in, even though he is on the road. And once again, welcome back to Pick One. And we are once again subjecting you to an evasion Pick One with, once again, the Mauser versus Mosin Nagant.
I feel like I've been here before.
And I believe the last time you picked the Mosin last time, right?
I believe I did.
So let's see what you do this time. Because, of course, we are in Stalingrad. And shall I start this with the... Let's see. I can start the brief. As usual, we'll do our METC brief, which basically outlines the mission and situation that we're in. The first time we started this, by the way, so Josh and I, when we first started Pick One, and we did this like years ago, METC was kind of an unknown thing in the public ear. That's just something that I was used to in military briefs. But now I feel like METC has become like buzzword even out here in the civilian tactical sphere, the gun sphere. And so, as many of you guys know, we are looking at this from the perspective of the mission. Key players, which is a modification from enemy, because we want to look at all sides to see who we're dealing with. Terrain, troops, which kind of key players side. Time, and the civilian consideration, which World War II Stalingrad. That's going to be an interesting one for us to talk about, civilian consideration.
Oof.
I don't think it was much of a consideration.
As if the soldiers didn't have enough PTSD by themselves.
Indeed. Anyways, so are you guys ready to get into discussions on the Rattenkrieg?
Let's roll.
All right, so mission. Obviously, right now we are a German sniper specifically sent out to locate and destroy an enemy elite sniper. I would call a high value target an HVT rather than just like an elite sniper. Makes it sound like a cheesy cell phone video game. This was an actual mission that they were doing back then on the Eastern Front. So it is very feasible to be sent out to do counter sniper operations. And then the secondary mission, obviously, because we are, in fact, being ambushed, is to survive and get off the X. And some might say that the secondary mission may become the primary mission at this point, now that we are here. And so, as we would say, get off the X. And so the location we are at is not a very friendly one, is it?
That does not look fun at all.
All you see, like all of the arrows, red or green. I appreciate they don't use blue from a really nerdy military perspective, but red and green are pointed straight into that that city on the River Volga. And that gray mass right there, that is where some of the worst fighting took place. And as we go farther into it, have you guys actually looked at pictures of Stalingrad, or have you? I mean, obviously, many of us have seen the iconic documentary "Enemy at the Gates."
I've seen a few pictures beyond that, yeah.
So here, let's look at the key players first. This is Josef Sepp Allenberger, who was the sniper on the Eastern Front, the man who wrote the book Sniper on the Eastern Front. And so this is typical of the German side, but the Germans also use camouflage. You'll see a lot of the images that the German snipers were walking around without camouflage. You would be surprised to hear that turns out both sides had propaganda units working it.
Shocking. Yes.
They would clean up the snipers, in fact, before they took images. And so they didn't look like blacked out faces with camouflage all over them. I think there were more images of the Russian snipers who were still in camouflage than the German ones, but both sides employed camouflage techniques for sure. And on the Russian side, another famous sniper on the bottom right, you'll see the real Vasily Zaitsev, who does not look like Jude Law.
No, not quite so much. His rifle doesn't look like Jude Law's rifle either.
In fact, if you're interested in that, Ian has recently published a video talking about all the wrong sniper rifles on in Enemy at the Gates. Highly recommend you check it out. But these right here you see are the Mosin PEM snipers. And I think we can get into talking about the two firearms a little bit more down the road. But the PEM snipers are within the collector sphere. is widely agreed that it is a step up from the PU Sniper later on issued, both from the glass, the mounting, and the build quality of these pre-war, specifically, I have to emphasize, pre-war made sniper rifles.
That's
Ian,
the best of the Soviet sniper rifles right there.
And you brought up a point that technically all the German sniper rifles are wartime production.
They are. Now, German wartime production wasn't quite as bad as Soviet 1942 wartime production. But yeah, there are no pre-war German snipers unless you're talking about stuff reactivated from World War One.
Yeah. The certain crooked S organizations were taking some random rifles and turning them into snipers too. But that's really like going beyond that that scope that we're talking about, right? Here we're talking about the standard Kar98k with a very loose Zf39 4X optic.
Yeah.
So the terrain, does this look familiar for anyone who's
the movie?
It is. It is. If you look closely enough, look on the bottom right. There's a figure. I believe that must be Vasily Zaitsev.
It clearly must be.
But yeah, so this is actually images from Stalingrad. I don't know the significance of this. If anyone in the audience could tell us why we have like a ring of children dancing around a crocodile. I actually did not have the time to look this up, so I would really like to learn about this. So please go ahead and comment that if you know why in Stalingrad they have a little ring of children dancing around a crocodile. But anyways, a lot of house-to-house fighting, a lot of relatively short range, not actual CQB ranges, because there's a huge difference between urban fighting and CQB. There should be a distinction between the two, because urban fighting can actually stretch like 100 to 200 meters. And Josh, you and I have talked about this within modern context, with people putting together SBRs and thinking that they're not going to go past this little short distance. Well, Stalingrad is a historical reference of a highly urbanized location with a lot of fighting, which people were still shooting within the 100 to 200 meter range as far as snipers go. But a lot of the fighting was actually relatively short compared to even sniper distances. Now, once you pressed out to the suburbs, they were shooting at actually greater distances, but that's pushing out to the suburbs when you had more of a military operation to support. So this is an example of when you're pushing out farther and you're seeing more rubble and more destroyed buildings. But pretty much the entire city was absolutely destroyed. For modern context, when we're looking at like places in Ukraine, how there has been heavy fighting and an entire city of like 30, 40, 50,000, these small cities just absolutely demolished and destroyed to the ground. That's what we're looking at right now. And part of the terrain is also that we are in Stalingrad during the winter time.
There's no cell phones in sight there, but I'm pretty sure those guys aren't really enjoying the moment very much.
You mean this isn't a band cover for an album?
They're glaring because they tried to touch grass and all the grass is blown up.
Yeah, so I've always thought this image, like they seem to look surprisingly in relative good spirit for being in a location where you have frost on your eyebrows.
Yeah.
And the guy behind him doesn't even feel like, it looks like his nose is about to fall off. So cold. It's very cold. Josh, you're muted right now, unfortunately.
I was wondering if he was muted or just literally not saying anything.
Well, it's maybe a little of both, but all I can see in the guy on our right is Rob. That's just Rob, isn't it?
Oh, that is Robski.
I mean, a spitting image. A spitting image. He has to be a lot taller though, but a spitting image.
Yeah, that's true. Let's see. And of course, troops. Once again, what we talked about earlier, propaganda.
That is clearly a propaganda photo right there.
This guy looks like he just steam pressed his uniform and polished his helmet right before he went to battle. This is clearly not Stalingrad, as Ian was talking about. Look at the grass. Funny because during GWAT, you'd have guys, especially in Iraq, they would get grass flown in to plant like a small plot of grass outside of their little headquarters or like their hooch. And that was a luxury for them because they would walk outside of their tent, water the grass a little bit, and then just step on it with their bare feet. So it's a little small things that, when you look at pictures like this and you're like, that looks really nice and all, but something's wrong with this picture. But anyways, as far as troops go, this is a relatively typical look of, the image of the German sniper, and you are in this scenario by yourself, which the Germans did work in hunter teams. So they did work in shooter spotter teams. But there are also instances where the Germans were working as individuals on the front. I think that kind of became more and more rare down the road, seeing how the Russians were working, because the Russians, on the other hand, were indeed working in shooter spotter pairs, and then also they would work in shooter spotter pairs, picking up sectors to take out targets, high value targets that they would see cross the sector. And they also were working really hard to run 5 to 7 sniper teams to do counter sniper operations. So when you're talking about, as for German sniper in this scenario, you're out there working solo, you picked off one sniper, and then you sit for a while thinking, oh, the coast is clear, let me go up and pick up that weapon system. And then another shot rings out. That would be a German sniper who has a doctrine that is less suitable for the environment, running up against Russians who are pioneering some new counter sniper operations, new counter sniper doctrine that the German is not used to. That absolutely, in my opinion, could be a feasible situation. And at this point, you're by yourself. You're trying to get out.
So what you're saying is that it was the reverse of Enemy at the Gates then. Instead of the Major Koenig coming and doing counter sniper operations, it is in fact the reverse that was pioneered.
Well, the Germans also did counter sniper operations. I mean, obviously both sides recognized that this was the problem. In fact, the reason the Germans had snipers, you could argue, was for a larger counter sniper operation, because there's two things. You've said in the past, Josh, two things that snipers, are most... the enemy of the sniper, artillery. The Germans had plenty of that. But then the other one is a counter sniper operation. But that said, the Russians definitely had a lot more skin in the game. They definitely had a lot more time perfecting their sniper units, sniper platoons. And they definitely also had more population to push towards that particular skill set. Let's see. All right. You've got 24 hours to exfil. Typically, your route is about 12 hours, but today it's going to take a little bit longer because you are, in fact, low crawling out.
Kid looks way too happy.
Sasha
right there.
Sasha right here really wants some chocolate. Poor Sasha. So, for those who don't know, this is Sasha, a character out of Enemy at the Gates. If it's not apparently clear, all three of us really enjoy the movie Enemy at the Gates, and we've clearly watched it many, many a times, especially me. But civilian considerations. I actually have not. I haven't read a lot of official documentation on how they handled civilian consideration. A lot of it came down to the individual soldier, and whether they were a decent person or not. I've definitely read of a lot of war crimes on both sides. Perhaps it would be less war crimey for the less probable for the Russians to commit war crimes before they crossed outside of the Russian, the Soviet.
Given it was
Russian
their
state.
their
That's those are
yeah.
their people. Yes, probably there's less of a probability, but and then vice versa, the Germans once they cross into, Greater Prussia, probably they're then on the defense. And then the war crimes sort of shift. The war crime football shifts onto the other side. But that said, definitely was a very cruel war against the civilians. But when you're talking about civilian considerations, I did not find any official consideration from the German side on how they,
I mean, we're leveling a city, right?
Yeah.
Like we're talking about leveling a city. It's probably not.
Okay, this is actually a really touchy thing. I was about to say like how they dealt with the civilians, but we also know exactly how they dealt with some of the civilians during the entire campaign. So civilian considerations is basically what civilian considerations in this one.
I don't think in this scenario we really have to, like, it doesn't seem like running into civilians is particularly relevant to this scenario anyway.
Yeah, okay, so let's get past this slide. This is an uncomfortable slide for anyone on the American side to look at. So at this point, we shall go into...
Да, принято. Контролируем автоматическое сближение. Да. Метров. Предельная скорость сближения. 1.2 на сближение.
An absolutely unnecessary bookend. So,
Ian, was that an intentional spin? Because it was well timed, elegant. It was a well timed and elegant spin.
So, our picks. I felt that for this one, Ian and you and I have had conversation on Enemy at the Gates. I feel like years before even this. Josh and I individually have, but it's basically on the movie. And Ian and you and I, let's be real here. You and I have invested more of our personal time into this, which, Josh, have you read books on this topic, or like how do you feel about it?
On World War II or
no, on the sniper wars in World War II at the Eastern Front?
No,
okay,
not at all.
I would honestly, because of that, I feel like Ian and I, our views are a little bit more affected by, really diving into it, studying it a little bit. But, on the hot take side, I feel like Josh is probably going to have a better hot take than we would, just because we've kind of been fans of this type of stuff a little more. What do you think, Josh? Would you have a better hot take than us?
I don't know. It's probably the more practical take.
Oh, that is a good one. That is a good one. So I wanted to see what Josh would say.
Okay, so I approached this from the perspective of, I think what a large portion of the viewing audience also approached it from, which was, I have my rifle that I literally just use to great effect. How would there be a time where I would then dump that rifle off and switch to something else? And so the entire baseline that I approached this from was trying to find a reason to do that. And I just really couldn't get there mentally myself. So my pick was stick with my Kar98, in spite of the fact that I personally actually prefer to shoot the Mosins. Like when we're on the range, having shot yours now, I actually like shooting Mosins more. I think that they're, some of them are very bad. Some of them are not good. But when you get a good example of one, like that's an actual nice Mosin, I think that they're really nice shooting guns. And yeah, I actually kind of enjoyed them more than the Kar98s. But in this scenario, I couldn't find a way or a reason to alter, off of the gun that I would have, again, known what I was doing with and been trained on and been issued.
All right, so I realized after deploying this, because I wrote the scenario. I realized after deploying this scenario that the comments were skewed, very, very skewed. That said, I'll talk about some of the strange. There's a strange disposition of the comments between the different outlets here, but I realized during these escape and evasion scenarios that it is actually really difficult to choose something outside of what you are using, because that is what you know has worked. That's the one that you have your zero set up for you. Perhaps, I mean, Ian, let's look at it this way. I feel like if we had to choose under this situation, I feel that type of reliability and knowing the weapon system is probably going to trump everything.
It really probably should, yeah.
But in order to have an intellectual conversation here, though, because if we do that, I mean, then that applies to everything. Then there is no conversation on whether in this scenario, option 1 or option 2 would be best. I would say, could we withdraw that a little bit and look at it from the perspective of these are just 2 specimens on the spot. Which one would you take? Let's take away the possibility, as a video game, video game rules on that one.
Which is actually the more desirable rifle?
Yeah, just on that, what would you pick as far as an intellectual conversation to have? Because the most intellectual part is ignore all of the features and which one works for you.
Comment section is going to love this. 100% the Mosin.
Oh,
yeah.
So I would love to hear.
All right, so here's my rationale for that. First off, there are Mosins and there are Mosins. A 9130 made in 1942 is like a rifle, the stock's carved by a rabid beaver, and the milling tools used on the rest of the gun are far out of spec and all dull and crappy. PEMs are not wartime guns. All of the PEMs, and it's important to point out here that the scenario specifies a PEM. The picture here is a PU because PEMs are really, really scarce, and I assume you don't have one around to take the picture of. But PEMs are all pre-war guns. They're made to, not only are the pre-war guns made to a better standard than the wartime ones, but the snipers are made to a better standard than the regular rifles. The scope on the PEM is going to be equal or better to German glass because the Soviets worked with Germany to develop their sniper scopes. And the PEM was specifically we worked with a bunch of Germans to come up with the best scope we could make, and then we improved it. It went from the PE to the PEM. They took their scope mounting system that was okay, but needed a little bit of work from the PEs. They improved that as well. The Germans would, late in the war, copy the Soviet mount as the long rail K98 snipers. It's a good rifle with good glass, and it's got a suppressor on it. And to me, the idea of not just a suppressor, but a suppressor and a supply of subsonic ammunition makes that really kind of a no-brainer compared to the 98K.
Oh, wow. Last time you chose a Mosin, this time you chose a Mosin. What?
You keep giving me options where the Mosin's the better choice.
So, Josh, with this, let's circle back to you. I want to make a case for the 98K though, because my pick in this, I would actually, and Josh knows I freaking love shooting my Mosin. I love shooting both these PU snipers. Well, I would love to shoot a PEM sniper personally. I really would, because like Ian was saying, supposedly the quality on the optical system is supposed to be really nice compared to the PUs. Even though I have a strong preference to shoot the Mosin sniper here, I think for this particular scenario, outside, and this is withdrawing from, I'm already putting this up. Outside of the outside of the suppressor, ammunition, all of that, for me, it comes down to one. I feel like the 98K, well, I don't feel like, you can see it here. The 98K is significantly shorter than the Mosin PU or PEM, especially with a Bramit device, which that is not a Bramit device, by the way, in the image. That's actually my Tyrant 9K. But it's about the similar length, not the similar girth, but similar length there. But you can see how much longer it is. And it doesn't look, on a flat range, you don't think about it much. But when you're on your belly, when you're trying to crawl around, when you're trying to get around rubble, when you're trying to go around little portholes and whatever, that 1 foot less is actually significantly easier to move. And in my case, I'm thinking more in line of E&E. I'm trying to evade. I'm trying to get out of there. The other part of this is actually the ammunition. Would I like a suppressor? Yes. They did not exist right now, and we can get into more of a conversation. I'm sure Ian and I, we were talking about how the Germans copied the Bramit device later on by captures like this. But the other point is I felt that if I wanted to use it, a lot of times when you are shooting in places like this, and you could see it even in the movie Enemy at the Gates, your enemy could be behind like these little portholes or these little small little locations to where you can only get a small shot through like less than a grapefruit size hole. I would want the match ammunition. I care less about the incendiary ammunition. Like, yes, you could shoot into the porthole and pop him off. You would hurt someone. You wouldn't kill him. You could take him out of the action. I mean, that's not a small pop with the incendiary stuff. If someone is behind and you popped an incendiary into the pothole, they would not be firing back very quickly. But I feel like that combination in that environment, one, facilitates E&E. Two, it also helps with taking a shot into a smaller hole that I potentially would be running into.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. That said, that's the thing. When I wrote this scenario, in my mind, it was a lot more difficult than when I watched what people chose.
So I think the problem is, as written, where you're in the middle of a mission and you have the option to pick up an enemy weapon in situ, realistically, it doesn't matter how much better that weapon is to a point. I mean, if you could pick up an AR instead of your Mosin or Mauser, maybe that's, but you have to get really kind of absurd, because even legitimately, if someone said, here's a different rifle and it's 50% more accurate than yours, you really still keep yours because you know how it shoots and you don't know how the enemy one on the dead guy does.
Right.
Maybe the guy's dead because his rifle's not zero and that's why you were able to shoot him.
But that being said, though, I mean, on the zero, I want to touch back up on that, because you and I know you had a point on.
And
on
I
that.
Just saw this come up in the comment stream.
Let me pop it. Actually, let me see. I'm going to move this. So this is a typical. This is actually a long sight rail, like Ian was talking about. You can see the sight rails longer here. To give it a little bit more stability than the earlier short side rail. And I did not know that those were copied from the Russian PEMs. And so this is exactly what Ian was talking about, an LSR late Kriegsmodell. And then this is the one with the Bramit device. And here you go, Ian. You can talk about this.
Yes. So that's an original Bramit. And one of the neat things about them is your holdover dope is actually engraved in the body of the scope. So these were primarily intended to be used with iron sights and subsonic ammunition. And you have right there, and you can read it in that picture if you look closely, you have the sight setting. So if you want 100 yard zero, you set your sights to 7. 700. If you want
Wow.
150, you set them to 8.5, 850. 200 is 9.5, and it goes out to a maximum effective range of 300 meters with the subsonic ammo. So in theory, you pick up that rifle, if we assume that it is zeroed, which is a reasonable assumption, there's your holdover right there. Like, you've got a BDC on the scope. You want to make a 200-yard shot? Set the BDC to 950.
That's pretty sweet. I had no idea that that was how these were configured. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So a quick thought here then. So given that we all sort of, I think, generally agree on the premise of this being, there's almost no situation, Ian, to your point, there's almost no situation where you give up your firearm, right, in this scenario. But we do know that there were numerous examples where German snipers would train on a Mosin, for example, prior to going out and actually having to use it. Given a scenario with, again, like a small tweak to this concept, given a scenario where you're back at the barracks, right, or you're back out, on your side of the lines, and you're given the option of press A for Mosin, press B for Kar98, and you have time to go, ensure they're both zeroed, so on and so forth. I would be interested to see what those who are watching right now would say. Mm-hmm. Would you all still be super into the, both for you guys, obviously, but also for the comments section? Are you guys still all in on Kar98 because you would never, ever drop, your issued gun? Understood. What if you were literally got to choose before you went out? And Ian, Henry, where do you guys sit on that?
Now, I mean, one thing I want to point out, I specifically put this image in here. Maybe it's not here. Maybe it's in a later one. The Germans. Okay, first of all, it's a bolt action rifle. So when you're saying, this is a different manual of arms, the difference between a Mosin and a Mauser is far less than an AR versus an AK. I think there's a little bit of if this then that of a concept there. But on top of that, a lot of German snipers have experience on the Mosin PEs, PEMs, and PU. Specifically, Allerberger, his first kills were with a PEM. It was with a captured PEM. There are a lot of images of the Germans using captured Mosin snipers. The rifles are actually quite nice. I mean, in America, there is this adage of it being a garbage rod because they were sold for $70, $69 at one point of its time. And when you look at it, you equate that to the garbage rod. I think the garbage rod is a hilariously awesome nickname, by the way. If that were my country's issue, actually, my ancestors at one point had issued the Type 53 Mosin Nagant. So, I would say there's a little bit of of people like trying to equate the line Mosin Nagant to the sniper Mosin Nagants, because the sniper Mosin Nagants absolutely were handled, especially the PEMs, were handled with a lot more care. And so, on top of that, a German sniper would likely know how to use a Mosin Nagant sniper. I mean, that is not a difficult translation, and it's a documented fact that many of them have experience running that.
Not only that, there was substantial German use of scoped SVTs.
Yes.
Yes. You can't try and tell me that you're not going to be able to figure out how to operate the enemy's bolt action rifle when you can pick up their semi-auto and use it without problem.
I think, Josh, to your point, the biggest question here comes down to whether it's zeroed and that it works. Yeah. More so than whether your character understands and knows how to use an enemy's bolt action rifle, right? But on that note, Josh, I mean, if you were to take all of that, and I feel like it's a little unfair to you that you already kind of cast your vote, and then we came to this conclusion about, what if we use video game rules instead? Knowing all this, having this discussion, what would you say, Josh?
I would go with the Mosin.
Oh, I need to change this for Josh.
Okay. So to me, if this is changed to, you're back at at camp or at base, and you have to pick one of the two. The thing that makes the difference is the suppressor.
Yeah, I agree.
If you didn't have the suppressor on it, like, to me, the two rifles are very similar to the point that it would probably come down to the individual characteristics of the rifle and maybe like the overall length like benefit of the K98K is enough for me just to say, but take the 98K if neither one of them is suppressed.
What about the concept of the subsonic ammo here? Like, how much do we care about the ammo being subsonic and only having a? Granted, again, we're going back to the idea of we're going out for the first time with this, knowing that subsonic ammo is pretty tough to shoot accurately outside of, let's call it, I don't know, 200 yards, 250, 300. You start to really have a lot of drop going on with subsonic ammo beyond that distance. How much do we care about that particular piece of this?
I think within Stalingrad, it's really not a big deal. I don't think I don't think you have the opportunity to make much in the way over 200-yard shots anyway.
So back to the terrain concept that Henry flashed at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing. Go ahead, Ian.
Let me also point out the mission here is get back to base.
Right.
In theory, the suppressor might be irrelevant because you might not fire a single shot the whole way anyway. Like, the mission here is not eliminate an entire division worth of enemy troops. It's get back to base.
Right.
So, okay, so I see some potential target at 400 meters. You know what? Maybe I just don't shoot at that guy right now because I've got more important things to try and accomplish.
Yeah, fair enough. Yep. So the disadvantage of subsonic from a ballistics perspective far outweighed by the fact that if you're actually having to take the shot or you're actually in a position to take the shot, it will be less of a factor. I can buy into that for sure.
Yeah, especially if you're shooting from inside a building, out a window or out a hole in a wall, you've got a suppressor and subsonic ammunition, it's going to be really hard for someone to figure out where that shot came from.
Just out of curiosity, I know, Ian, you've actually got a full video on the Bramit device. Josh, have you heard of the Bramit device before this?
No.
Ian, would you mind giving us a quick rundown on the Bramit device, maybe like 5 minutes on what it is, how it works, and how it's put together?
It's a really simple suppressor. So as you can see from the picture, it's not a threaded mount. What actually happens is it clamps over the front sight on the rifle, just like a bayonet. And then you actually unscrew the front, which pushes the body of the suppressor against the front sight and locks it in place. So sometimes if you see these mounted on rifles, it'll look like that knurled front section is a little bit, is not threaded all the way in. And that's because that's how they made it a universal mount. That's what actually tightens it on. Construction-wise, it is a wipe-based suppressor. So there are a couple big, thick rubber wipes in it. It's a really simple deal it's a really simple deal inside. You're going to have a limited lifespan with it. Part of the reason your long-range accuracy isn't a big issue is because you're going to lose that long-range accuracy anyway because you're shooting rounds through solid rubber wipes, and you're not going to have as good a dispersion as you would with a baffle-based suppressor. The Germans did copy these. They also made baffle-based suppressors. Like, they experimented with a bunch of stuff. None of it really got into serious service. But the Soviets made a lot of Bramits. During the war, probably their biggest, really the only variation in the Bramit was development of different rubber compounds for the wipes that had a longer lifespan, especially in cold weather. That's kind of the Bramit in a nutshell.
Have you actually shot with them, man?
I have not. No.
They're exceedingly rare nowadays.
Yeah.
It's actually. I'm surprised. At first, I was surprised nobody's heard of them because, like, my nerd, I read about them in actual books from the library back in the day. But I realized that how rare they were, and that's probably why nobody's actually talked about them. You know, one, it's an NFA item technically.
Yeah.
And two, it's actually, you don't really see them very often.
They were not exciting souvenirs to bring home to the extent that American troops had access to them anyway. The other thing for people shooting them today is those wipes are disposable. You're talking 10 to 50 rounds tops. before
Wow.
you've blown a solid hole through them. Now, the benefit of that is they are quieter than baffles for those initial shots.
Huh.
But no one today who gets if you have a Bramit today with new wipes in it, no freaking way you're going to shoot it because you're going to destroy the wipes in the process. So
That makes sense.
I don't know that there's anybody out there much now who's actually got experience shooting one outside of maybe Nets.
On top of that, World War II rubber. I mean, you've shot plenty of number 5s. Lee Enfield.
Oh yeah, who knows what shape those original baffle? Well, we know what shape those original wipes are in now, and it's not good.
So rubber has a shelf life too. So it's kind of like optics. When you look through some optics nowadays, when it's like all moldy inside, obviously the Wehrmacht or the Soviets didn't go and say, oh yeah, this got mold in it, no big deal, let's press it out. No, that is not an acceptable item. It's through the years it developed mold inside, and therefore nowadays when we shoot antiques, it is in antique form. The Bramit wipes nowadays, if you find them, the rubber is also in antique form, i.e. unserviceable for its use. But one thing I read that was interesting about the Bramit device is that sometimes soldiers would disassemble their own cartridges and dump part of the powder out to reload in the field and make their own subsonic ammunition. And sometimes, turns out, they would take the Tokarev cartridges and just dump a Tokarev's cartridge powder charge in there and just reassemble the cartridge to run in the Bramit. And so that was that's super interesting fact that I read about a while back.
It was a real thing to make your own subsonic ammo in the field. These weren't just issued to snipers; they were issued to scouts and recon guys as well. Anyone who kind of needs to be a little subtle about what they're doing. And so it would be a definite possibility of like, no, you're trapped behind enemy line and you don't have access to proper subsonic ammo. Well, here's a way you can modify the ammo you do have to be subsonic. I'm sure it's not like the ideal, but it was a real thing.
What do we know what happens if you shoot it with a full power ammunition? Is it like catastrophic, or is it just simply blow out the wipes?
You're going to have a little more wear on the wipes, but you're going to get a supersonic crack.
Yes, of course. But it wouldn't be a catastrophic failure of the device itself.
No, not at all.
So, just by the way, Josh, you posed the question. Mosin. Thank you. All right, got it. I am standing as a minority now. Mosin.
Wow.
Ian, you are quite the persuader. But
I mean, it's the suppressor that does it.
So one thing that someone was talking about was also here. This is also what we talked about. Aliberger, actually, he really liked his PEM, which again, German snipers, it's not difficult for them to figure out how the Russian one works because, surprise, it's very similar because it was developed by German tech. The interesting thing about that to me is also, when you're looking back at it, when the Russians rolled out the PU optic that was supposed to be for the SVT-40 in semi-auto, and then rolled that and put that onto all of their PU snipers for logistical reasons, the Germans then copied it by making the ZF4 for their rifles. I thought that was interesting. Then the short glass kind of goes full circle. Like long glass was developed by Germany, taken to Russia, and then the short glass.
I suspect the rationale was the same. For the Russians, the reason for the short PU was so that they could mount it on the semi-auto rifle and not have it overhang the ejection port and cause like cases to bounce back in.
Yeah.
The ZF4, you don't really see used on Mausers. You see it used on Gewehr 41s and 43s.
Yeah.
You've got the same issue. So I suspect that's what was going on there.
To me, it's just an interesting development of how the ideas bounce between both sides. Both sides then having a focus on sniper operations. Let's see.
We've got a guy in the comments who says suppressors are bullshit because all guns are noisy.
Oh, this seems to be a minority comment when you consider that almost all sniper units in military or law enforcement tend to want to have suppressors on their firearms. Like, I don't know a sniper unit that says, oh, no, leave the suppressor. I would rather be loud.
The noisier everyone else is, the more useful the suppressor is for a sniper.
So it turns out that
you get totally lost in all the jungle, and that's the way they want it.
I mean, that obviously, the Germans copied the Bramit device. So obviously the Germans also saw value in that and saw enough interest to develop their own program. So
in being Germans, they actually developed like 5 of them all simultaneously. Well, not simultaneously, but they developed like 5 of them and then put none in.
None of their parts interchange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They're all totally different.
So on that note, we do have a guest contribution here. Austin from Vintage Warfare. He primarily publishes a lot of shorts on YouTube, but let's see what Austin has to say. Stand by.
All right. Well, so 9-Hole Reviews wants to hear my little autistic rant about this, so I will oblige him. Thank you for including me in this. So my choice in this scenario, I'm a German soldier, I assume a sniper, needing to egress back to friendly lines, and I have the choice of taking a K98k or a Mosin Nagant taking off of a dead Soviet with a Bramit device and a PU scope, the K98 having a Zf39. Me with the K98, I would have about 100 rounds of ammunition of varying types, and then the Mosin Nagant I have around 250 with subsonic and ball ammunition. Now, I'm again going to look at this through the lens of a soldier. If my goal is to egress, I'm probably going to want the shortest, most compact rifle possible in the lightest combat load, or at least enough ammunition to make a fighting retreat, right? I'm going to choose the K98 based on this alone, not only because I am biased and I believe the K98 is objectively better than the Mosin Nagant, not that both of them were bad service rifles, but I just believe the K98 is better. But for this particular scenario, I feel like I don't want to lug around, especially with that Bramit device on there. I'm not going to want something that's like way longer and like more cumbersome to lug around with me. And I feel like carrying around 250 rounds of 7.62x54R would not be fun, especially if I have to low crawl my way out of a bombed out hellscape. I just feel like that would be kind of problematic. I don't think that even with the whole sound signature thing, I don't think that would really in this scenario be my primary concern, especially when I'm going to assume the noises of war, especially World War II, are going on around me, like artillery, planes droning overhead. Do I really care about that, right? Another thing about it is I want to have a rifle that I'm more familiar with. I don't know why that I would pick up, and I understand that in World War II there were a lot of pictures of soldiers with captured enemy equipment, a lot of German soldiers, and I think that has a lot more to do with logistics than it has to do with, wow, I see this, as far as they're concerned, experimental enemy technology. I wouldn't trust that. The average soldier probably would not trust that enough to be like, hey, I really want to pick that up and use that, as opposed to just using your own stuff that you know, you've trained with, you understand the zero, you understand how it shoots. I don't know why you would choose something that you have zero idea, especially with like added devices to it. If I had no idea what that was, I would just be like, I don't want to touch that. But there was a lot of curiosity though. I'm sure times where Russian soldiers saw an STG-44 and they were like, wow, that's interesting. But you don't see them lugging it around through combat zones because they probably don't A, have the means to shoot it consistently, and B, they're not really familiar with the manual of arms. They were never really formally trained on that. So that's my take. K98 supremacy. And yeah, I guess why would I want something I'm not familiar with in the situation? If I were a Russian, I'm sure I would have picked the Mosin Nagant because I'm familiar with it. So that's kind of all I got to say on it. Thanks for including me.
All right. So obviously this is not Austin's take. It is this one. But that said,
he makes very valid points.
Yep. So Austin, Vintage Warfare, if you haven't seen his channel, I encourage you to check him out. He likes to run around in a tracksuit with a pickle helm on his shorts. So, gentlemen, is there anything that you guys would like to add to this before we transition to the next?
No, let's go.
So now there's one quick thing. The idea that, and like I said, Austin makes good points. In a realistic scenario, it doesn't matter even if the alternative gun is better. I'm not giving up the one that I have that I know, not because I understand how it runs, but because I know how it's zeroed and I know how it operates.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it works. Like, who knows? I pick up some random enemy soldier's rifle. Maybe it's broken. Maybe the ejector is broken. Maybe the extractor is broken. I don't know. But the notion that I would avoid it because I'm not trained on it and I'm not familiar with its operating mechanism, to me is like saying, you know, oh, you're out in the field and dead enemy soldier has a Glock, but you're issued, I don't know what, you know, some other striker fired polymer pistol. Well, you wouldn't pick up the Glock because you're not familiar with, you know, you're not trained on it. You're not familiar with how it works. They're the same freaking gun. Like, people weren't stupid.
I would say
Mauser, you can operate a Mosin, and it's like there's no debate, there's no question about that to me.
So he does bring up a point. Yeah, I don't think he was specifically gearing at this point, but logistics, German logistics, atrocious in certain ways. The reason why Sturmgewehrs were less picked up and used came down to logistics.
Yeah, no ammo around for them.
They had trouble supplying 50 or 7.62 Quits to their, or 7.92 Quits to their own people, much less trying to capture it in a wartime and apply it. So was it Fury where he was rolling around with a Sturmgewehr or something?
Yeah, Brad Pitt's character. Yeah.
I mean, you'd have to be really good at battlefield pickups to be able to keep that thing running. Like, granted, they had a Sherman to like dump everything into,
and he had a tank to shoot with. I get the feeling that's a role where you don't really use that gun much. You pick it up with one combat load of ammo, and if you ever have to actually shoot up that ammo, then you like, whoop, gun's gone. Find new gun.
Now, this is not related to this because we're veering into Fury on the other side of the European theater, but I don't know if people have actually held a Sturmgewehr before when they talk about the Sturmgewehr. That thing is massive. Like, it is not the size of an AK. No, it is long
and heavier.
So when you're talking, and there's no folding stock to it because the buffer goes into the stock. So when you're talking about an armored crew, by the way, with not a very, where space is a luxury, picking up one of the most massive firearms in the field, granted, way cool, a Sturmgewehr, select fire. You have machine guns on your tank, but let's, regardless, whatever. That's perhaps one of the most luxurious pickups that you could get. Like, I feel like that is such a status symbol to be able to pick up a Sturmgewehr 44 on the Western Front and just continue to plow through and say, oh, I've got the ammunition to shoot this exotic little piece of equipment.
You know what the most popular German pickup was on the Western Front?
M1 carbine?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Ooh, this thing's light.
that was a guess, but yeah. I mean, yeah. Josh and I, Josh has shot the M1 carbine quite a bit. He and
the understanding I have is the Germans, most of the time, like the majority of Germans given the opportunity would take an M1 carbine, and the majority of Americans given the opportunity to take a souvenir gun would take a Luger. Yeah. Because they weren't looking to improve their own combat loadout. They were looking for a souvenir.
So the other thing is, too, I mean, the German picking up the M1 carbine probably doesn't know this, but the 30 carbines were all non-corrosive, from my understanding.
That's true. Yeah.
Because the gas system is exceedingly difficult to clean if you need to clean it. So that's also a pretty bougie thing to roll around with your non-corrosive, one of the only non-corrosive super lightweight 300-meter weapon system.
To get back to our main point, I want to answer a comment from Kyle Burchard here, who suggests that you just take the silent Bramit off the Mosin and put it on your Mauser. That doesn't work because it's not a threaded thing, and even if it was, the threads aren't necessarily the same. But that bayonet lug mount, the front sight clamp, isn't going to fit a K98K. So.
Also, I mean, I didn't know that you had to unscrew the front to adapt it on. That doesn't sound like it's a QD system.
No, it really is.
It is.
The reason is you put it on and it fits, but it's kind of rattly and loose. And you need to, because it's not threaded, you need some way to actually lock it down onto the muzzle. So all you do is you take that threaded section and you just unscrew it, and it tightens the thing right up. Honestly, it's no more work than screwing on a threaded suppressor.
Okay. So I mean, same question. Would it fit on a K98? My first thought is no.
Nope, no, it would not, because the front sights are different size, and the barrel diameters are different.
Okay, so any more thoughts on this? Because we will get into the point where we can bring audience comments, but that's good that we've been bringing the audience comments in throughout. Any more thoughts before we go to the next segment?
Good to go here.
Да, принято. Выдаю УППС исходная. УППС исходная. Есть загорание двух диодов. Отпустил погасли. И выдаю ВПС исходная. Есть загорание двух крайних.
All right. So this is where it gets fun, because we get to analyze some of the other people's pick, and we're not really put on the spot, and we can be the peanut gallery.
I'm going to answer one more real quick.
Okay.
Luke Flauger asks if Mosins are concentric. It's a white-based suppressor. It doesn't matter. You're shooting a hole through the rubber anyway. So, yeah, they're mostly concentric. It's not like you have to worry about a baffle strike. You're deliberately shooting through the wipes anyway.
It's nice to see that the AKs carry that on.
Yeah.
So, typically, Josh and I, we know this. If it is a very difficult to pick one, we would see it reflect on the score, on the charts, on whether someone would pick one or the other. It's typically a 50-50 if it's a very difficult one. For this particular one, I think we were quite skewed by the fact that the German carried the 98K in, and based on our answers too. Once I said let's dial that back, Josh flipped over, and Ian, yours was the Mosin throughout, and then you could see with the comments, many people had also commented that they would switch to the Mosin because with that premise being removed. So I think moving forward, we'll kind of vet some of these things and kind of prevent some of the situation to where it makes it too easy to choose, because I don't like it when it's easy for people to choose. I like it when it's really, really difficult.
There's a really interesting theoretical discussion to be had of, if you're in this situation with a very generic, like let's say you just have a totally standard 98K, and let's say you are a sniper, but you don't have a scoped rifle. You just got a regular issue 98K. How much better of a rifle do you have to find to be willing to make the swap? Like, maybe you find a PEM and it's got a scope. Maybe it's a PEM with a suppressor. Maybe it's, I don't know, you can get into the whole alternate reality thing. Like, maybe it's an AK. Is an AK better enough to be worth picking up an unknown AK over your known K98K? There's no right
for
or wrong.
me. I dislike 98Ks. I will tell you off the bat. The standard 98K, despite it being the second firearm I've ever purchased, and that's still with me. I like that thing for the nostalgic reasons. I dislike 98Ks because of that barleycorn front sight.
So you find a Moss 36.
Thank you, Ian. But to your note there, though, the Moss 36 is zeroed in the factory, and there is no way for you to destroy it unless it is destroyed.
also means if it's not right, there's no way for you to fix it either.
Correct. So maybe we should put some of that French flair into some of our future ones for you, and then I already know the answer of Ian McCollum for that one.
You think you do. We have to try it to find out for real.
but on the note, I mean, 98Ks. Going back to it, the action on the 98Ks, I like working the actions. In fact, not a 98K, but the older small ring action, the Swedish Mausers. Josh knows I have an obsession with the Swedes.
There might be a sickness, yes.
I have like 4 96s, a 38, an AG42, and then I rechambered an SSG 3000 to shoot 6.5 by 55. Yeah, I like Swedes. But on the Swedish Mausers, they are just a joy to work. So, like, if Mausers are made, like pre-war Mausers, there's a definitive difference between a pre-war and a wartime, and specifically also comparing the late war 98Ks. Huge difference. And people don't talk about that because they like to poo-poo the Type 99s all the time, having the last ditch, but they don't talk about the Kriegsmodels, which were not great. And honestly, the Russians, when they did continue manufacturing, they had the luxury of drawing manufacturing as far into the Urals and as far back from the front lines as they could to prevent it being bombed. And quite frankly, the Luftwaffe was not really existent towards later and later you got, because homeboy decided to yeet his Luftwaffe towards a little island with tea and trumpet, and that was no more. And the Russians, I would say, on the manufacturing side, were able to keep. Yeah, it's wartime manufacturing, but at least their their issued items were more standardized, and they had the luxury of being away from being bombed, and still being able to continue the logistics and the manufacturing and production route. And you definitely see the lack or the fall off of the production quality with the 98Ks and the Type 99s, both of which, again, were being bombed mercilessly.
All right, what do we got for comments here?
Okay, so So first one.
Whoa. TLDR.
Yes, I think you have already answered this one. Basically, there was a big. Sorry for the wall of comment right here, but there was a lot of people talking about the bullet drop of the suppressor and subsonic cartridges, and I think a lot of this has been pulling current day thought into past day thought, and also not really considering the really short distances that some Stalingrad engagements could be facing. So what are your thoughts on this one? You already talked about the BDC charge that was on.
Cool.
Yeah, if it were me, I figure again, I'm picking up an unknown rifle, so I would definitely want to do a little bit of, a test shot or two, but I'd take that thing, I'd dial the scope to 700 or 850, as it says on the body of the scope, or body of the suppressor, and fire off a round or two and just confirm that it does hit where I expect it to hit, and then good to go. It's
of course, granted, that's not like you're being ambushed, you're belly down, and you take a rifle and try to zero it on the spot. That's not what I'm saying. That because people are going to be like, oh, why would you do
I got 12 hours to crawl out of here. It is suppressed and subsonic. I'll probably have an opportunity at some point to fire off a shot and not worry about being located from it.
Right.
Like, I'm not trying to be in a position where I'm vulnerable at all. I'm going to hide right behind some wall where there isn't anybody. And
you know what the interesting thing is? I just thought about this. The PEM scope is also windage dialable.
Yeah. Oh, so is the PU.
But you know what is not? Is the German ZF39s.
Really?
Yep. Because the way you zero the windage, you have to zero it on the mount.
I didn't think about that.
So there is no way you could re-zero the 39 in the field without a screwdriver.
That's a good point. Huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Henry,
I was informed that Germans had all Wunderwaffe.
Henry, quick question on the commentary of dope.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing in this scenario it was subsonic ammunition, granted, but in general, how close are your drop tables between 54 rim out of your Mosin and like shooting your Mauser out to call it 400? Like, are your holds different, really, if you were doing holdovers through an optic out to 400 with either of those two cartridges?
I usually would, if I wanted to set a combat setting, I would set it at 300, 2 or 300 meters, and then just hold out, which is also what the snipers used to do back then. However, I will tell you that I don't know what the difference between them are because I am not running on mills or MOAs. Yesteryear technology, it was all etched in the turret. So
given that you would dial your turret on both of those systems to say 300 and do a belly hold out to 300 and then start to go upper chest, to head as you go beyond. Like
you could cover both of those very similarly, 500-600 right? by doing that.
Right.
But that's on a torso size. Sure. And there's also a reason why typically 400, 500 meter sniper kills were considered a long shot back then. It's outside of needing more marksmanship, and the big thing is needing to take a second shot and you missing the target and blowing your position. That was really, the Russians actually had a huge focus on, you don't want to blow your position and get killed, because snipers were actually fairly valuable to them. But regardless, I mean, at the Stalingrad distances, it is not. I mean, there's no difference in the manual of arms. You dial it to 2 or 3 and then just shoot it on the torso. So, anyways, let's see. This one, I just put it in here. I didn't know if we would have talked about it, but yes, we have gone through great lengths that we would take the rifle that we know. So,
yeah.
Now this one, I specifically put it in here because we had people talk about. This is a particularly more caustic comment.
No Nazi would ever think to take an inferior rifle made by inferior people That's why none of the Germans used captured Polish or Czech or French or any other rifles. They never did. There isn't a 12-page long list of German designations for foreign rifles captured from inferior peoples for their own use.
You certainly don't have any Waffenamps on foreign pistols.
Never. Definitely not.
And that photo up there on the top right is certainly not a Wehrmacht soldier shooting a PEM, Mosin Nagant.
And all of the photos I've seen of the Wehrmacht and the SS using scoped SVTs are definitely fake.
And the comment down below where he's talking about Sepp Allerberger, trained and operating both platforms, certainly did not exist, and there certainly was not a book called Sniper on the Eastern Front that greatly outlined his experience shooting a Mosin Nagant and scoring his first kills with a Mosin Nagant sniper. Shall we go on and on, Ian, or...
I think we can just leave it now at the fact that Buckaroo Banzai 555 is a moron.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, unfortunately, this goes into the sphere of comment curating on the back end. I think that goes beyond it, which is also why, sometimes on forums, there's a lot of really good information on forums too. But sometimes we need to consider the source, and consider what we're referring to. And there's, I also on a side note, I lived in Germany. I worked with Germans. There wasn't, and old school Cold War Germans. There was not this mentality. There was, at least the ones that I worked with who were old Bundeswehr, were fairly respectful of the capabilities of the Soviet Union and the DDR. They would not have a massive presence to counter that if they did not have that respect for the Soviet Union and the DDR. So, yes. Let's see. So, two things that, sorry, again, wall of text, but I found it interesting that he was approaching it from the information side, so the intel side, and the propaganda side, both of which I'd say more so for the intel side, because we know that actually happened from a captured Bramit device.
Yeah. Here's the question. If you were on this mission, and rather than pick up an enemy rifle, the situation was simply your own rifle gets hit by a bullet and is rendered inoperable, can you make it back to your own lines without a rifle? And from my reading of the situation, yeah, you probably could. Mm-hmm. Therefore, is it worth bringing back a potentially valuable piece of enemy tech? Arguable, yeah, it is.
Josh, what do you think? You think of anything else outside of this? I mean, on the propaganda side, I don't know. I mean, if he got a dog tag of the enemy that he was looking for, like the movie or the documentary that we so reference about Enemy at the Gates, receiving the dog tags of Vasily Zaitsev. I don't know. Did they propagandize any capture of? I don't think that was a huge propaganda piece for the Germans, at least. I think on the other end, the Soviets certainly did lots of propaganda on captured German equipment, though.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I will answer a quick question in the comments from Matt Morrison here. Did the PUs have different rifling? What made them more accurate? It was the barrels for the snipers, both the PEMs and the PUs were made specifically on a separate production line to a higher tolerance. So the allowable variability was less than that of the standard infantry rifles, and that's what made them more accurate. The accuracy standard for a PU was 4 shots from 100 meters into either an 8 or 9 centimeter circle. It changed at some point during the war, but it's basically 3 MOA.
That's pretty similar to the German standards, quite frankly.
They were kind of all the same at this point.
I think the big thing that the Germans actually did issue match grade ammunition, though. But back to the point of logistics, they issued it.
Yeah, did you get it or not?
It's a huge difference between those two.
Yeah, German civilians got ration tickets for meat too, probably, but that doesn't mean they can actually get it.
Oh, yikes. Okay. Let's see. Both rifles almost similar. Performance, what differs between is the 98K having better glass and overall better quality and zero inconsistency. Shorter length makes it more usable, and the 98K has reached to 110 yards. Okay, so I wanted to talk about this specifically the last part of this comment. I wanted to talk about it because our channel shot it out to 1 kilometer, 1,100 yards. Matthias Hetzenauer, famous German sniper, also shot it out to, he actually shot it farther to 1,100 meters and hit a target. Confirmed. Wow. This does not mean that the effective range is 1,100. I mean, I want to make that very, very clear. Just because we have done it on practical accuracy does not mean that is a risk that I would take with a 4x scope, potentially under fire to take a 1 kilometer shot. That said, Josh, you tell me. I feel like the way the Mosin was shooting, I would be very comfortable shooting that thing out to 1,100, quite frankly.
Yeah, well, I mean, within the same context of practical accuracy, right? Like, is that what you mean? In the same context of practical accuracy, right? I think so. We were able to shoot that on the most recent run. Obviously, the original run, we had a very tough time due to the optic being damaged over the years. But on the more recent run that we've just published, was it a week or two back now, Henry? Mm-hmm. That was a extremely effective run out, I think, until like 800. And even then it was just just dialing in the dope, and then you were able to get on target like very easily. I think if we go to the 900, you would have no problem. There's no reason to make me believe that at that distance, somehow magically, if a switch would flip and then you wouldn't be able to do it. So yes, granted, in previous days, you are now responsible for being the one who did this 1100-yard shot. I do think that the Mosin could definitely get there without too much issue.
Yeah, I don't want to. Distance, of course, is one thing, but really, practical and effective distance,
Right.
I think goes beyond how far can you or should you are two very different things. Essentially, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I would also mention on this comment that I think there's a bit of a misconception of the difference between the Kar98 and the Mosin in this case. A pre-war 98 versus a 1942 Mosin, yeah, there's a big difference. But you know what else? A pre-war PEM versus a 44 or 45 Kriegsmedal, there's an equally big difference. If we're talking a pre-war 98K and a pre-war PEM, because all the PEMs were essentially, I mean, not quite all, there was very limited production using up leftover scopes, but essentially all the PEMs are pre-war production. There's no quality difference between the rifles. They're both really quite good.
Yeah, I found that the wartime production has a lot. When people go out and buy these things, and that's how people form a lot of opinion on these things. They go out and buy one, but the one thing that a lot of people look past is the difference between pre-war and wartime production. And when you get a sample of one. And this is why Josh and I have been looking at potentially doing some redos, because we've had some samples that were just not good representations of what the rifle can do. It cannot be used to draw a conclusive idea of this is what the rifle is like. However, in this case, we know that the German sniper rifles were all wartime production, and we know all the PEMs were pre-war production. With ironically, with Germans helping them set up the facilities to make the optics. How do you like them?
They were allies until the summer of 41.
Yeah, you guys know the image of the Germans and the Soviets shaking hands in Poland when they met up, right? Yeah. Oof.
What was that? After Poland forced Germany to start the war by invading it?
Oof. Anyways, next comment. All right, so
maybe, possibly. I mean, we're Americans, so war is a big looter shooter.
That's the outtake that you take from this, Henry, and you put as like the little clip, the hook right at the beginning of the video. Yep.
Yeah, we're Americans, so this is what we do.
Oh man.
So it's interesting. Shout out to Christian over on our Discord server, one of our Norwegian friends, talking about how currently the policy in Ukraine on captured weapons is you are not going to capture weapons and use them. The amount of booby traps and sabotage weapons, and it just opens up a whole host of variables in real life. And so I wanted to take this as a positive comment to look at and say, yes, this is not what we do nowadays. And even when we were overseas, it was not common. Like after the initial invasion period, you always have stories of guys, Marines picking up AKs or soldiers picking up AKs and just like returning fire or firing those instead of, or the famous image of the Marine in Fallujah with a PPSH, right?
Yeah, I remember that.
You have images like that. And to your point, yes, we are Americans. We do what we want, right? But nowadays, that's turned into such a liability that in real life, people actually do not trained people tend not to do that as much.
I think there's something else to be said here, which is the place where where it actually happens is when one side is significantly winning, taking territory and capturing weapons, because when you have a stalemate or when you're on the retreat, you don't generally capture a whole lot of stuff. But if you're advancing and you're taking weapons that fill a significant role that your own equipment doesn't fill, And the place where we actually see that happening is Germans taking sniper rifles from the Russians in the early stages of the invasion of Russia. And we see the same thing for like the Finns capturing Russian arms. They weren't advancing, but they were taking out substantial numbers of Russian troops and capturing guns from them that they needed and were able to put into service. And this is why we see all those pictures of German snipers with Mosins, with SVTs. It's because they didn't have much in the way of sniper rifles to issue themselves. You don't see them so much taking Papashas or taking Degtyarev submachine guns because they had MP40s.
True.
And if you've got something in your own inventory that does the job, you don't really pick up the enemy weapon outside of some sort of, very specific tactical emergency. But when you don't have your own sniper rifle and the enemy does, that's when that stuff actually gets taken into service.
So I'd be curious. I don't think I've ever seen much of an image. I don't think I've ever seen an image of a Russian capturing an MG42.
It had to happen. Like
I'm
would
sure.
have been in 43, 44, but
Right. Because the MG42, like as far as general purpose machine guns go, that's kind of the gold standard. I'm going to go off on a limb and say that the MG42, which is still used in form of the MG3, is one of the best GPMGs that came from all of the belligerents of that era. But I'm sure that's happened. I've just never seen images of the Russians using it. I wonder if it's a logistical issue because those things do burn through ammunition fairly quick.
It might be. And the Russians did have DP-27s, Degtyarevs, which
True.
It's not quite the same thing, but it fills the same basic role, but with 47 round pans instead of 200 round belts.
You've shot one of those things. Those pans are freaking massive.
They are big, yeah.
That's a difficult time to maneuver for me. I'm not a particular tall and bulky person, so
they're a little clunky. It's hard to shoot one of those things so much from the hip. From the bipod, the pan really doesn't interfere with anything. It's more the problem is really carrying extra magazines around is a little awkward.
So what Ian is saying, obviously the Shoshaw is the best.
Absolutely. I assumed that was just everyone knew that.
All right, let's see. Okay, workable length and glass. This is.
Yep. I think we've hit on that.
Yeah.
We've hit on that. Yeah.
I'm not sure if the speed on target would really be what I would be focused on at this point when it comes to the using one or the other. Quite frankly, to me, the length, the ease of evasion, and quite frankly, even the possibility of having new tech be brought back for intel purposes would be.
All right. In all seriousness, though, let's think about this one for a second. How, for somebody who is shooting a bolt gun from that era and trying to spot a hit or a miss or where the round is going, the recoil on non-subs is not insignificant. Like you come off target a good deal, and it's not like shooting a 5.56 gun where it's like, oh yeah, now I'm right back on target spotting where the round splash is.
That's a good point I didn't think about. You might be able to actually spot impact pretty well with subs through a PE scope.
And now I want to expand on this, and I did not think of that either. Josh and I have, after shooting a lot of long distance stuff, like Josh has seen me spot 338 Lapua Magnum at 1,000 by myself.
Mm-hmm.
That can be done. However, what I cannot do is spot 338 Lapua Magnum at 200 meters, because at that point the bullet is still has already traveled there, and I've been knocked off the glass, and I cannot recover yet. And so you actually have more of an advantage at longer distances to spot your own hits. And so I wanted to add that to context for the audience out there. That's a really good point. I did not think of
making fast follow-up shots. No, because you're dealing with a Mosin Nagant bullet. Ain't gonna happen.
So thanks to Dr. Cox for the comment there.
Since it's a bolt action anyway, you aren't staying on target shot to shot. Incorrect. I stay on target and watch my round impact on my bolt before I run it. There's maybe some schools of thought that tell you not to do that and that you should run the bolt immediately, but that's not how I've learned to shoot. I spot my hit before I run the bolt.
So on that, there's a slight deviation between SWAT tactics and military sniper tactics. Josh, you and I shoot with a lot of military snipers, and so spotting your own hits, that is a thing that military snipers tend to preach more than SWAT snipers. SWAT snipers, they like to, Milspec Mojo. He's a SWAT sniper.
Yes.
A lot of those guys, they fire back on, fire back on.
Yeah, I see within the context of
Yeah.
the comment here, just so we're clear on what we're talking about. You're going to stay on glass and watch the round impact before running the bolt. Again, that's how I would treat this. I'm not super sniper though, so I don't know. Yes, obviously you have to run the bolt before the next shot, but you are going to undoubtedly watch where the impact goes if that's the case.
Yep. So this is a comment that I specifically wanted to add this in here because there's a lot of generalization. If you're World War II German, then you must be. If you're Russian, then you must be. I have read a lot of the accounts from World War II. Obviously, your autobiographies are going to be a bit skewed in ways that that may paint you in a better light. But I find a hard time to believe that an entire population is inherently evil. And I think by believing that, whether that's back in yesteryear or currently today, generalizing the population, I'm not telling people to be naive here, to say that there is no evil in the world. There obviously is. Wars happen. People get killed. Civilians, their homes are destroyed. Their families are torn apart. Kids are made orphans. There's pretty terrible stuff going on around the world. But blinding yourself and saying everybody on the other side is just evil, even when I was overseas, we could see that, there could be guys who are Taliban, but they're Taliban because that's just kind of how they operated in the region. If you were not, then you would get your stuff kicked by the Taliban when the Americans left. There's more to these things, I think, than just labeling someone with a uniform on. That said, of course, certain uniforms committed worse crimes than others. That's just something that I wanted to throw in there, that I felt that was easy for people to label others and not exercise actual thinking before they got any deeper.
There's probably a lot. Sorry, not to interrupt. Just there's probably something to be said here where you did take everything within context. The comment is not that people are good or people are inherently bad or anything along those lines. I don't know. I read Ordinary Men. Ordinary Men is a very, very tough read when you think about what it means in context. And without, stealing language from people probably far smarter than I am, when you get into the context of watching some political commentators and stuff talk, there's a line Jordan Peterson references, which is, you probably wouldn't be the good guy if you were in history. So there's a lot of introspection that I think is required when you have these types of conversations. Sorry, Ian.
I was going to say, on a slightly separate note, I think you have a lot of guys who get brought into the military without really wanting to be there in a war like this. And even the guys who do join up out of patriotic fervor, I think by the time combat really gets real, most people are there, essentially they're fighting for the guy on their left and the guy on their right. I think a lot of the idealistic, theoretical reasons for being in a war kind of tend to go away once you've seen a fair amount of combat. Now, I'm not a combat vet. I'm speculating here from things that I've read, but you don't get a lot of really gung-ho ideologues after you've been in a war zone for a while. It comes down to, I'm here to survive. I'm here to keep my buddy on the left and my buddy on the right safe, instead of an ideological thing. And honestly, I think that applies to the subjects of the Sonderkommando, the ordinary men, where they're not doing it out of some huge racial hatred so much as that's the go along to get along. This is how I get through this, by doing what everyone else is doing around me.
Yeah. Exercising critical thinking, I think, is the biggest thing here, and being able to know what you believe and what is right and what is wrong. I mean, it's difficult to, it's easy to say, it's difficult to actually apply in real life sometimes. But at least when I was in, we were always, and again, bad stuff happens, but a lot of times you were told that you needed to obey orders, moral orders, and correct orders, and you always had a right to disobey immoral orders.
Or as Ivan the Mad Vandal says, that's what the commissars are there for.
Oh my God. There we go. Very well said. That is the last comment that we have here. Did you guys have anything else that you saw?
There was one super that came in way back at the beginning, Henry, under the starred.
Here we go.
Yes. So, Stareem says, excellent live information as usual. Great to have you all together. Love both channels. Bestest from Scotland. Thank you.
Oh, cheers. Yeah.
Yes.
Scotland is one of my favorite countries in the world.
It is excellent.
Oh, I could spend a month, 2 months, 3 months there, and I still would not get enough, quite frankly. So hello from here, and hope you're doing well and staying warm.
Henry, we should mention that we are, in fact, giving away a 9130 PU.
Sure. If you check out the comments section, you will find a link, or two links, whether it is us or Forgotten Weapons, and you will have a chance of winning a 91 PU that we've featured in. Actually, Ian's featured it firing in his videos. So,
yep, I've got the 0 card that you put up for it. I seem to have done a very poor job of communicating just how rare and valuable that rifle is, because we've had very low interest in that rifle, much to my surprise. Like, a lot of people are like, it's some garbage rod. Like, it's an original PU in gorgeous shape because the Poles refurbed it without putting any new parts on it, essentially.
I think a lot of us who start shooting think that the 98K is the end-all be-all World War II rifle, or the American sniper rifles, which is even more ridiculous because the American snipers were pretty pathetic back then compared to what the Germans and the Russians were doing. Yes, I said that. Fight me in the comments section. But the Mosin PU to me is interesting because it's, one, the manufacturing side is interesting, but two, it is the wartime continuation and adopting current logistical aspects of the SVT sniper, a project that they started. They had limited success. It wasn't unsuccessful.
But it was unsuccessful enough that they stopped making them. Yeah.
I mean, it still had decent field time use. It still was documented on the German side to where they saw an effect that the SVT-40 had on them. And it still is the world's first SAS, semi-automatic sniper system. So M110 boys, eat your hearts out. But from that, carrying, having an optic production and that piece transfer over to the Mosin PU and continue on the legacy of the Russian sniper projects through the Mosin PU, through wartime, and seeing it in hands of the late war snipers, to me, the more you get into history, the more you find that to be really, really interesting. And it, in your mind, it ceases to be a garbage rod.
Well, not to mention though that, again, as somebody who would be the apt consumer of seeing a thing as a garbage rod or something else, right? Like, I don't know what it is I'm looking at. Cool. This was one of the nicest finished, conditioned looking Mosins that I've seen personally. And the grouping you shot with it, Henry, given like that one flyer that you sent, it was like a very, very stupid group. It was extremely effective in terms of accuracy. Like punching, I think 7 out of 9 shots were in basically an inch.
Yeah.
If I'm remembering correctly.
And that was
very
with, like,
accurate rifle.
That was hunting ammo. So those are soft points, because I'm trying to. I've got a bunch of soft points that we bought that I'm trying to turn into brass and then use the brass for other things. I know that's such a bourgeois comment to make. It's too good for that stuff. No, I'm not. But even with soft point, which is technically less accurate than ball ammunition, or on the equivalency of ball ammunition, that particular rifle shot very, very well, and the action was quite smooth. And I actually ended up cleaning quite a bit of cosmoline off of it. You're welcome, ladies and gentlemen. What you don't see in the background. So, I mean, it is drop-in, ready to go.
Yeah, it's the most common actual real sniper rifle of World War II. Someone's going to get super lucky and take that thing home.
Yeah.
People have a really good chance at it if they want it, because it's not been a popular one.
That's all right.
Everyone's unfortunate bad.
It's all right. Someone is going to be happy, and I am happy for that person. So whether you decide to do it or not, we still appreciate your support to both of our channels. Obviously,
Absolutely.
we work with Ian a lot these days, especially with history of weapons of war. And so, yeah, definitely appreciates you supporting the, what should we call it? The guild? The conglomerate?
What did you call it in the other video? Like the cartel? You said something ridiculous in the other video.
The homies?
It's a good group that we've got going.
Yeah,
for sure.
Anyways, that said, I mean, shall we move on to the last segment where we take comments out from the open?
Let's do it.
Нейтраль погасли, рут влево, есть догорание 2 крайних светодиодов, в центре не горят, нейтраль погасла. Выдаю рут на торможение.
Hello. All right. So now we are in the open forum stage. So everybody out there, feel free to drop any comments that you have. Let's look through the backlog. Are there any comments that jump out to you that I should be pulling?
I've been trying to respond to them as I see.
Yeah, I was going to say Ian's actually done a very good job of keeping us on track and actually answering comments that have come in.
Sorry, on the last one, I just realized that I described a Mosin PU sniper as a bourgeois piece, which is the communist sniper.
No, to me, what's bourgeois is complaining that you have too much hunting ammo and you need to turn it all into brass so you can properly reload it.
Ooh, yeah. Commissar, please spare my life. I will say that in advance. Let's see.
Is our hypothetical German soldier aware of the nuances in difference of quality and production? Probably not. Now, you give him 2 side by side to look at, and it's not hard to figure out. But is he paying attention to that in the,
I would say
not.
I would say though, between snipers, if he's a seasoned sniper and they know to recognize enemy items, they probably have an idea on, because a sniper is observant.
That's true. He is a sniper, and this is his field of expertise.
Right. So they look for certain things, certain details of the enemy. If a certain enemy seems to be more experienced, and hey, his scope is a little longer than all the other ones running the little short scopes, that seems to be a special item that the harder snipers to defeat seem to be using. I don't think it would be put that far past a proficient German sniper being able to identify certain things like that. But that, of course, is an assumption. I would just say that the Russian snipers at the very beginning, or the Soviet snipers, I should say, because there's a lot of different contribution factors there. The Soviet snipers at the very beginning were certainly taking the Russians or taking the Germans for a ride of their life. And certainly they had a lot of key positions being dropped like flies in the Wehrmacht. And so the Germans responding to that is a huge. They did not underestimate the snipers as they got into it, thinking that, oh, this is just a Russian sniper. This is, they are not very proficient. No, that it is a Russian sniper. It is a Soviet sniper. That is someone that they knew was an imminent threat. Let's see. Trying to look
seven for Stalingrad.
There's a repeating question that's come up that is, does anything about the timing of this within the Battle of Stalingrad inform or change your opinions? I.e., is this post-encirclement or pre-encirclement? I can't find it. I just scrolled for it. I can't find it, but I've seen the same person ask it numerous times throughout the course of this.
Let's see. So I'm trying to think what difference that would make pre or post encirclement. I mean, supply certainly is more of a difficult thing. I mean, later on it got really freaking cold in Stalingrad. Surprise. I'm not sure that. You have no ability of calling fires because you have no radio as a lone sniper out there. Because back then it wasn't just picking up your little personal radio to call for fires. So that was an actual pack that you would be carrying around. In fact, the interesting thing is, on that note, the Russians, that's actually one of their high value targets, are radio men. They would look for the guy with a big pack or spools of wire, and those guys were top on their list to take out.
Yeah.
That, I guess, pre or post encirclement, that would be the biggest thing. So logistics and what type of fire support you would have, of which were very poor when you were encircled. But if you don't have the ability to either in this situation, I don't think it really matters that much.
I don't see it really impacting the tactical situation.
Right.
My job of get back to friendly lines isn't really that much different early versus late.
So, let's see. Did we talk about the difference between the optic choices? The Germans. So not this one, obviously. Yes. The comments are coming in, so I'm trying to click on them. There we go. The German scope isn't much better. This is actually kind of a loaded question, and something that we could delve into a larger problem that the Germans had. A German scope is not very descriptive in this situation, because a Russian scope is descriptive. It's either the PEM or the PU. The German could be the litany of ZF39s. It could be the ZF41. It could be the 41. I mean, Ian, you've had strong feelings about the little tiny scout optic that goes.
We're not even considering that for
right.
this.
So the Germans scopes were, I mean, there were a lot of different builds, there were a lot of different qualities of them. There were a lot of different types of German scopes that were employed. I think this draws to a much bigger problem, in my opinion, that there was not a lot of standardization along the German ranks. And when there wasn't a lot of standardization, you end up with a difficulty not just with training per se, but also your difficulty when it comes to maintenance. And scopes do break. And then on top of that, the wide variation of mounting solutions that the Germans employed were also problematic. And by the way, they were supposed to be detached during movement. Now, whether the snipers did that, I don't think they did. But the design for all the German optics was for it to be detached during movement. I don't think they did that very often, though. But the wide litany, the huge variations of German optics and the German mounts in a wartime scenario, I think absolutely presents an issue. It's something that nowadays we don't really understand because we have pick rails. Like everything fits on everything.
Yeah.
Back then, that was just not the case. You didn't have stuff that you could fit on in the field. In fact, if you used one of the turret mounts, some of those scopes were silver soldered onto the rings and then attached to the rifle. So it's difficult to say that the German scope isn't much better. Some of them are very good. Some of them, like the Ajax scopes, that's honestly one of my favorite World War II era scopes. It's actually Josh earlier. I went and bought an Ajax for my M41B, and I showed Josh the bill because we used some show funds for it. And Josh was like, "This is what? A 4X? You paid what?" Yeah, but but the quality within the German manufacturing was a lot more spottier, in my opinion, than the Russian side. But Ian, your thoughts on that?
Oh, like to me, the PEs and the PEMs, you might as well consider them pre-war German scopes. They were made with German production technical assistance. You know, the scopes were designed with German assistance. German factories were involved. The PU is a little bit different because that's sort of the value engineered scope, where it's not just how nice can we make the scope, it's also we have to compromise this to make a lot of them in a very short period. Literally hundreds of thousands. It's, what was it? Like the Soviets had more sniper scopes than the Germans had semi-auto rifles.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something on the order of 400,000 when you combine the PEs, Ms, and PUs, and 3/4 of those were PUs. So pre-war, it's let's make a really nice scope. With the PU, it becomes let's make a good enough scope that we can crank out real fast. But for this scenario, we're talking a PEM. It's a really good scope. It's probably going to be superior to some of the German wartime scopes.
Wow.
Let's see. It's actually something that nowadays we don't typically face until there is a supply chain issue.
Yeah.
So it's something that we should pay attention to.
Hey, Henry, we had another super come in.
We did. Green Bean. Really appreciate it. Green Bean, I wonder if he's affiliated with the coffee joint that we had downrange. Green Bean Coffee.
Regrets coming in so late, was in a meeting, being productive or something, wasn't paying attention. Good, solid. Here's something towards ammo or tacos. Delicious.
Ian, when you visit, we will cash this in and we'll have tacos together.
I'm a fan of good tacos. So.
Now here's something that I've been seeing over and over again, and only Ian can tell me what this is. What?
That barstool thing?
An undefeated barstool.
I have no idea what that guy's talking about.
Okay.
He succeeded in getting Henry to put his comment on screen.
Yes. Yeah, sorry, Jesse. I'm totally lost here. So.
Let's see. German scopes were notorious to zero. I'd say the 39s were not easy, but then the 41s, the little scout thing on top, that was just
The 41's a disaster, but the others aren't really.
yeah.
I mean, you got some issues with scopes where you have to zero them on the mount instead of the scope, but beyond that,
Yeah, so the 41, I wish we had a picture of it to throw up right here. The ZF41, if you look it up, you can find it right now. They're little tiny small ones that go where the rear sight on the 98K or Sturmgewehr would go. I could see some German engineer going like, hey, Klaus, I have this best idea. We can take away these turrets on the side, and there's not going to be this little small screw on the mount to make it move. And then you use these two chopsticks, yeah? And then you are going to tweak it like this, like you are turning the radio knobs. I could see that as an actual thing that the Germans did, and then probably thinking, nah, it's probably not going to go up into adoption by the hair. And then it does. And then someone up top who just looks at the paperwork says, this is cheaper and smaller, and you can put it on more of them quickly. 50,000. What?
yeah.
I could actually see that as an actual thing that they could have done back then. But
Well, it kind of was a thing they did do.
Yeah.
The guys in sniper school who got ZF41s were not super excited about the whole thing.
Yeah, they were arguing. They were complaining, saying that it's some egghead who came up with the stupid idea, and we just need some regular scopes.
Yeah,
there's a huge story to that though, and I think you've told it in the past to where it was not made for the sniper, but ended up with the sniper though.
Right, it got pressed into sniper service because there weren't enough of the real scopes available.
Yikes.
It was supposed to be like the squad marksman's rifle. And in that role, I think it's pretty decent. It's a heck of a lot nicer than the iron sights to use. Henry, we were talking before the stream started about preferences on giant barleycorn, trapezoidal, triangular notch Mauser iron sights and how much they suck. ZF41, if it's zeroed, it's not bad. It's not a sniper scope, but it's not a bad piece of kit to have.
Yeah. Like I think that's the thing. I actually really like my 41 clone. It's a clone. It's not real. But I actually really like my 41 on my rifle. But I could see how in the field that is an absolute headache. I mean, first of all, you need tools to zero it. And the tools are not a screwdriver.
No. And so, it's a freaking nightmare to zero. It's not easy.
It took me 200 or so rounds of 8
I remember being out there trying to help you spot while you were doing it. It was not an enjoyable experience for me. Never mind you going through it.
And that is on a flat range.
Yeah.
And not in wartime. With all the ammunition we could, our credit card could afford. But regardless, I mean, you could see that on paper how that could be a Wunderwaffe. Like, can you imagine if on paper they were able to spam these out and put them on every single rifle out there in the front? Massively increase the combat effectiveness, but then logistically, can you support it?
Yeah.
That comes down to the big question is, that sounds great, but can you support it? And on that note, I would argue that both America and the Russians did much better in coming up with practical solutions and looking at the means of their manufacturing and what they could support. Obviously, American manufacturing is basically everything. But still, even with a massive manufacturing background, America didn't manufacture everything with a million different variations that you had to go through with a million different specialized tools to fix.
We actually had a lot of trouble with sniper scopes. Like, the scope that went on the 0384 was not the planned scope. It was not the Lyman Alaskan. It was the backup, because that's all that we could get.
It was was it the M73, the little soda straw that you're talking about, right? It's so for context, the Lyman Alaskan is actually quite a nice scope. Even like for a lot of, I use one for CMP, one of the CMP sniper match rifles that we have out here. But because they could not, it was adopted, but then Lyman stated that they could not manufacture at that rate. And so they ended up having to take the next thing, which was Josh, have you ever seen 3/4 inch rings? Like not 30 mil, 3/4 inch rings. That's
Not
like
1 inch.
Yeah, like 20 mil rings.
Yeah, that's like 20 mil rings.
Yes.
It's a little better than a ZF41.
Yeah.
It is, but quite frankly, I mean it's also a 2x or 2.5x optic, right? The M73 optic.
2 3/4, I believe. But it looks like a 0x optic. When you look through it, you're like,
because there's like field of view is yes.
Yeah.
But or what field of view?
Your field of view is aim small, miss small.
But at the very least, you had turrets on the side to adjust it, whereas the 41 you couldn't zero it in the field. So,
although even you had turrets, but the click adjust was a little spring tab on the outside of the turret that made clicky noises as you turned the turret.
Yikes.
I believe they were also non-covered, right? Like they were exposed turrets, weren't they?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Let me see. I'll look it up. If you guys see any other
now
comments.
I'm doubting myself here. But
I wouldn't rate it favorably in my LPVO reviews. Uncapped free spinning turrets. Yeah.
Yeah, it's uncapped. It's uncapped.
Yikes.
It's uncapped, and it's like a bent, like a stamped sheet spring that that it keeps the click adjustment on the side.
Well, Henry, given that we are exceeded the 2-hour mark, we did get one more super chat from Jesse explaining his Barstool comment. Ian, does this make any more sense?
no, I still have no idea what he's talking about.
Good.
Sorry, Jesse. No, maybe this is a reference to some meme current events video that I'm not aware of.
Somebody help us.
Yes. At first, I thought it was the Barstool, like the meme channel.
Oh, like Barstool Sports?
Yeah. Let's see. What do we say? We can maybe pull up like one more comment. You guys see anything else that you guys like?
Well, there's one right there. Which would you choose, Scope G43 or Scoped SVT40?
Oh,
SVT40, easy.
Yeah.
But and the reason I would choose is
Rare 43.
Okay, all right.
Gun 43. How do you both just dismiss it so quickly?
Okay, is this a collector's question or is this an actual use question? Because if it's a collector's question, there's no question the 43 is more rare.
No, it has to be a use question.
Yeah. I've actually never shot a 43 though. I will plainly admit this, but I know the SVT40, despite it at the very, what I've heard with the SVT40 on long-term use is, it's it groups a little looser. The mounting system is not, it's really cool looking because it's a single point, like swept forward mounting of the optic with the PU optic there.
Mm-hmm.
But that seems a little chintzy to me. There's a huge potential for it to, do a little dip. But the SVT40 at the very least is a reliable system, I would say.
It's a more reliable system than the Gewehr 43.
Yeah.
The 43 had some production issues. The 43 bolt is just really complex, way more so than the SVT bolt.
German engineering at its finest.
Yeah, really. Like, we can do it this way, so we will, even if maybe we shouldn't. The gas systems are overgassed. The SVT is going to be more long-term durable and more simplistically reliable.
Mm-hmm.
It's got an adjustable gas system, which is a pro and a con. You can tune it to fit your ammo, but you kind of have to. It's one of those things where, like, the G43 is overgassed, so it'll run on everything until it breaks. The SVT, you got 5 different positions to choose from, which means if you just pull ammo at random, it won't work reliably. You'll have to tune it, but then you'll get a softer shooting rifle that'll last a much longer time.
Josh likes adjustable gas systems, so I suspect that Josh's answer is going to be the one with adjustable gas system.
They were both intended to be a sniper's rifle as well, and neither of them was ultimately successful in that role.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact issues with the G43 and the scope, aside from it wasn't good enough. The SVT had issues with first round, like cold bore shots, and the barrel would heat up really pretty quick and start throwing flyers.
Interesting.
The G43, did they use those like leaf spring rings?
Yeah.
For the ZF4?
More like a strap around the scope. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that being one of the sources of the issues. Josh, instead of an actual machine ring, they used leaf springs to strap it down and give spring tension on the bottom, so it would stay in the position.
When we contrast that against the modern desire of like absolute zero movement, bomb goes off next to your optic and it's still fine. That is wild.
It is hilarious because then you've got the Marine 1903 snipers that use the old school 10x unital scopes that when you fire it, the scope actually moves and you have to reset the scope.
Yeah.
And when you fire it, it like moves and then it hits a spring, so it won't like shock the scope too much that it'll break it. Like they took that to battle, Josh.
Yeah. And they liked it too. It was good.
And they liked it. Okay, so one more question though. I like 39 design scopes. That's basically the most classic German optic there that you see. It's a single turret on the top, and then the windage is zeroed through the mount on the bottom. And the reason I would like it for that era is that you've only got very few variables to it on whether it would work or not, and a lot of the mounting solutions to the 39s are some form of a QD mounting solution. So worst comes to worst, you can drop that and actually still use your rifle as is. So
very cool. Well, with that, Ian.
Yep.
Obviously, most people already know where to find you, but if they, for some reason, live under a rock and don't know where to find you, where would they look?
Forgotten Weapons on Google. Whether it's YouTube Forgotten Weapons, Instagram Forgotten Weapons, ForgottenWeapons.com, or best option would be weaponsandwar.tv, because that's our streaming app. All the videos, not just from me, not just from you guys, but from us and 6 other channels of historical gun content, all available on basically all common streaming mobile platforms, Android, Mac OS, as well as through the web if you just want to watch it through your web browser. So weaponsandwar.tv.
All right. Josh, Ian, I will open it back to you guys for any last words that you have.
Oh, I just want to thank Ian for coming on and delivering a banger of an episode as usual.
Thank you. My pleasure. These are always fun. So maybe next time you'll give me one that doesn't involve a Mauser versus a Mosin and an escape.
Henry, I think there's a what would Stoner do early AR base something or other that that makes sense. I could talk about AR performance shooting. Okay, you'd give me something to talk about other than being the guy who's just like
AR was the code for Mauser.
I mean, on that note though, Mauser design was prolific like the AR.
Yeah.
So of its era, it may as well have been the AR. But we could also torture Josh by making him sit through semi-automatic or select fire 5.56 rifles that are not the AR, like the Set Me LC versus an HK33.
Oh.
All right.
All right. Well, it is late here, guys. I'm going to get to bed here.
And so for everyone that's still out there, thank you so much for sitting with us. Please go visit Forgotten Weapons if you have not today. You should see what he has, because he publishes 5 or 6 times a week.
5 right now.
5 times.
Actually, just recently posted a video on the experimental German suppressor for the MP40.
I saw that actually.
We're talking about World War II suppressors. There's another interesting one to take a look at.
And so for everyone out there, thank you for your support for both of our channels. And until next time, Josh, we shall see them on the range.
716 is Steel 96, 4 Vic, 8 packs, Redcon 1, green to green. How copy, over?
Steel 96, this is 716, roger, over. 16, Steel 91, 1 pack,